Welcome to a Tech Moment on Cannabis Tech. I'm your host, Christina Etter. In this podcast, we take just a few minutes to talk about some of the exciting science and technology that's happening across the cannabis and hemp industries. And we also keep our finger on the pulse of the hemp and cannabis markets. So now, as we're starting to put 2020 behind us, I've asked Julie Lerner, the CEO of PanXchange, to join us today to discuss her hemp market insights from 2020 and her predictions going into 2021. So welcome back to the show, Julie. We are so happy to have you here to help us kick off the new year.
Thank you so much, Christina. I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to our chat.
So in December's report, I found it fascinating. I thought the report had so much great information in it, but it kicked off with this letter from you. And I want to read your opening statement because I just absolutely loved it. And you said, "This time last year, the PanXchange team took every opportunity to tease me whenever I used the expression, the tail wagging the dog. I was referring to the pie in the sky forecast for the U.S. addressable market for CBD. Now, obviously, you tend to have a more realistic perspective on the industry. So talk to me a little bit about that perspective and kind of what's behind this opening letter."
Sure. So that's one thing that curiously hasn't changed. The December report is our second annual kind of a state of the industry. Where are we at in commodity fundamental terms, as in what is the real supply? What is the real demand? And the letter goes on to say, you would never quote the wheat market in terms of bags of flour at Safeway. So why are we still quoting in the second year? I understand in the first year we had nothing to go on. So let's try to gauge this in terms of consumer packaged goods, because arguably it's a much sexier number than what we're about to dive into here. But they're still doing it this year. And as we'll also talk about, a lot of these estimates have not come down. So we're trying to keep it real for the stakeholders in the physical supply chain. You really need to know that with regards to cannabinoids, a little bit goes a very long way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't agree more. And there's so much more to hemp, though, too, than CBD. And I think that's something that kind of gets lost with all the hype that's surrounding putting CBD in everything in this market right now. It's kind of crazy to me how many different products out there have claimed CBD infusion. I think I even saw bed sheets, which was absolutely ridiculous to me. But I love that you have this more realistic perspective, and it's fun to hear about that more, I don't know, a grounded view of the CBD market. And you're right, it is a commodity, and this is something that is going to change and expand as it goes. So it's really interesting to kind of see how this is all kind of fleshing out.
And it's quite nerve-wracking too, Christina, because we're the contrarian here. We're the ones saying it's not that big. It's lucrative for some, but not all. And the farmers are getting squeezed again. And it's very nerve-wracking. I hope people find our reports to be extremely valuable, even though it's not what they want to hear.
Right. So let's talk about those, the analysis basically that was in this month's report. I thought it went really deep. And there was also an addition too with the Great Plains region, correct? Is that news to the report?
Yeah, we actually expanded our services quite a bit throughout the year. We now have a dozen benchmark prices, and we were the first to market with benchmark prices in hemp. That was for cannabinoids. We had biomass in three regions, and then isolate, distillate, and crude, winterized crude. We now have, I can go through the list, but we have a total of a dozen different prices. We were the first, and I think we're still the only entity that is quoting prices in hemp fiber and grain, true hemp. We believe that long-term, by volume, this is where the market's going. This is your grains for hemp hearts, for example. It's your textiles for hemp-like cotton. I agree, maybe CBD in sheets is a little bit nutty, but using hemp in lieu of cotton is a good thing. It's hempcrete, it's building materials. That we started quoting that side of the market It is an incredibly useful plant, and we want to focus on the growth of that market as well. So, yes, Great Plains in terms of biomass, the Northeast, and now we also have the fiber and grain, as I mentioned.
So talk to us a little bit about the three scenarios and what your insights are basically into those different scenarios.
Sure. Well, in the absence of required reporting by both the growers and the processors and the consumption, we had to get creative about how we can actually get an accurate snapshot in the market. So the first scenario, we used three different ways. And two were the same ways that we used last year. The first of which is taking public data from Charlotte's Web. So much like last year and what we just spoke about with regard to COVID not really affecting sales, Charlotte's Web again this year is going to reach about $95 million in profits. Again, that's the retail shelf price, right? So we break it down in terms of what that means and how much distillate and how much loss and price differentials and so forth. And we back it all the way to the farm. And Christina, as afraid as we were last year, I don't remember, it was a very small number of how many acres were actually needed to get to that 95 million. This year, 57. 57 acres to get to 95 million in retail sales. And again, I encourage readers to really take a deep dive into what we're writing here. Because it's just a microcosm of what's happening across the supply chain, and we also build the story on where the inventory build is happening, because I do think that that's going to cause prices to keep falling across the board. Biomass, isolate, distillate, and crude oil. Again, just downward pressure on that. Second scenario we used was this tail wagging the dog. Were these third-party estimates with regard to the addressable CBD market. What's shocking to me is one of them, the one that got the biggest headlines last year. Last year they said by 2023 we're going to go to 23 billion in sales in CBD. They've lowered that, I think, to 16 and change. What's shocking is this year they said 4.7 billion in sales, in CBD sales. That's Brightfield. Research and Markets was under $1 billion, but we understand that they're actually accurately taking out anything with that's considered marijuana in that. And Nielsen is at 1.2 or 3 billion. Again, you don't talk about the wheat market in terms of bags of flour at Safeway, right? So, but let's say you did. Even if we took Brightfield, that's the $4.7 billion market size. I'm just reading because I don't want to make a mistake. Even if we took that, the entire U.S. cannabinoid market would require only 4.4% of the biomass grown. That's remarkable. We've got to get real about this. A little bit goes a very, very long way. So that's the survey too, and it's consistent with regard to a little bit goes a long way. It's what we need everyone to really understand in this market. Third one, we worked with our dear colleague, Bo Whitney. He had gone out on a survey to growers and processors, and I think the big takeaway there was that he was consistently finding that processors were only running at an average of 42% capacity. Now that speaks to demand. Obviously, if there was demand for the product, it'd be flying off the shelves and they'd be at 100%. In fact, there would be the bottlenecks that everyone was worried about. And it is so my hunch is that people were erring on the side of optimism or positivity with that production number. I think it's at best 42% capacity. So again, we take all of that into play. We take the inventory accrual from 2019, and then clearly the pile on from 2020. But this is all just cannabinoid markets, not speaking to fiber and grain as we talked about. But pretty astounding all around. Pretty astounding. Even though we chopped the acres planted by less than half in 2020, it's still grossly oversupplied.
Just wow. Yeah, that's really interesting, and it definitely makes you pause and think about the industry a little bit, and consider things a little differently. So that's really interesting to hear.
Yes, as I said, a little nerve wracking because we know it's not what people want to hear, and it's just shockingly the other direction.
I think we kind of have to grasp this new crop and really determine where it's going to be most beneficial, and that's still kind of up for debate right now, and it's going to be very interesting to see the industry grow, I think, in the coming years. Do you want to kind of give us a little bit of what your crystal ball says, and what are your predictions for 2021?
So this is not as much of a prediction as a request to growers. Um, I would ask you to please stop tolling without sales. Yes, you need to toll your product to preserve the quality and get the extracted CBD out in crude or in distillate or whatnot. That's not a sale. What we've learned and what we're going to dive into here is that in 2019, the farmers took the biggest hit with prices tanking from July of 2019. For 6 months, biomass prices fell 84%. What's happening now is the majority of the supply chain it has gone into tolling agreements, which is great to preserve the quality of your crop. But now we've got this product that's getting stuffed in every corner. The processors have in certain agreements where the processor says, well, let's just profit share when I sell it, or they're giving the product back to the farmer, so it's getting stored back on the farm. So as far as next crop year, it's not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy. You've got to know where the stuff is going, because there, as we'll see, there's just not enough demand in the cannabinoid market for it. So I hope that the tolling agreements that cease to be nutty. It's just not fair to the farmer. I guess also I'd like to see, or I hope to see, a lot of progress on the grain side of the market, and fiber, and really seeing advances in the United States. Canada's already there, but in terms of helping the agrarian economy in this country with hemp.
Right, right. And there's so much potential, I mean, we're kind of in looking for all of these ways to increase the economy and to recover from what 2020 has dealt out. And I really think that the hemp and cannabis markets are going to be seriously looked at in the coming year or coming few years as part of that solution. So let's really hope that we start to grasp the hemp infrastructure and really start to push some more of these hemp products and hemp replacement products out there, so we can grow this industry even more. I think that's a fantastic outlook for the future.
Yeah, I think another thing that we saw that surprised me a little bit is that during COVID, marijuana sales soared. CBD, not that impressive, which to me tells me they're clearly direct competitor. And I guess the thinking is there now that the stigma is dying with marijuana and it's becoming more and more mainstream. Why go for the decaf skim if you can have the real deal? Maybe that's what the thinking is on that. But the numbers, the sales number, I think there was during COVID in Colorado alone, I saw that there was over $1 billion in sales. That marijuana. So that's remarkable. I think Rand Paul's, coincidentally, our report came out the day Rand Paul proposed 1% THC. That would most definitely help this market. 0.3 is seemingly an arbitrary number. So hopefully that'll help the hemp industry too.
Right. It's fascinating, I think, to hear you talk about them, or you talk about the hemp industry and being direct in competition with the cannabis industry, because we really, and I'll tell you, I almost expected it to go the other direction though, because of the way things were, I felt like more of the mainstream population was more comfortable with those products that were made from hemp. But now through the pandemic, like you said, we've seen the products for legal marijuana, or the sales for legal marijuana, skyrocket, whereas hemp not so much. So again, we're going back to that whole thought is, if it's legal and you can go purchase cannabis, at the local dispensary, then what's the allure with hemp? And I think that's really interesting to kind of see that perspective and see it playing out.
Mm-hmm. I do think retail CBD prices need to start coming down for this market to stay competitive dramatically.
Well, I think there's definitely some good stuff in the future for us. And, I was browsing through comments on YouTube this morning, Julie, and we've had a few questions regarding the PanXchange Hemp Report. And you went over a lot of the detail of what's actually in the report. Do you want to tell us how people can go sign up for it and where they can get all this information for themselves?
Absolutely. And thank you for that, because what we're talking about here is pretty high level. You simply go to PanXchange.com and then follow the drop down to benchmark reports, and it will take you to the subscription page.
Fantastic. And Julie, thanks so much for coming back on the show and lending us your expertise in the hemp markets and kind of grounding everybody. I think is the thing that we want to do, is realize that CBD is not the only thing that hemp provides, and that there's it's going to take some time, I think, to build up this market and to get everything in place to really start seeing this hemp market flourish and take off. But I hope you have a wonderful, prosperous new year.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you do as well.